Yeah, that'll do it. Break my whole living room for this setup. Okay. Hey YouTube, how's life? How's it going? How y'all doing? It's been a while since I filmed like a proper video. So today's video, if you can already tell from me like actually like sitting down and making a decent setup, this is gonna be a bit of a longer video and it's gonna be a chatty sit down video. So if you're like feeling in the mood for something more podcast style, this is a good one. I hate editing these types of videos, to be completely honest, so if I start getting really lazy at the end of the editing, that's why. It's because these bore me because there's not much to look at, and editing audio is my least favorite thing to do, and that's the most important thing in these videos. So today's video is going to be a little bit more serious. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time, like several years in fact. Like, that sounds really stupid. I think when I first saw one of these videos I was like 16, and I've just been wanting to like tell my own story for a while, but I didn't want to do it in high school because I didn't want to like bring up things that were going on in high school in this video and then maybe have people see it and then confront me about it. Okay, I just want to say a couple things really quick. It sounds like kind of bad when I'm like, oh, I didn't want to make this video in high school because then like I see people, and like I'm not trying to like make this video like roast people. I'm just trying to tell my story, and to do that it was like physically unsafe to do in high school. I didn't even go to my graduation for a very similar reason. Also, to be honest, I feel like this video has benefited from me not making this video while I was in high school, because I feel like now that I've been in college for 2 years and I've had some distance and like time to reflect on some of the stuff that happened to me in high school, I feel like I have a much better, much more omniscient perspective as well as my own perception. I think it benefits from me waiting on this video for a couple of years, but I just want to say that. Anyways, I'm getting distracted. So let me whip through the disclaimers real quick, as fast as possible. I want to be really honest with this video, really candid, and that may come at the risk of me not sounding super positive and me honestly like, it's gonna sound like I shit on a lot of people, and that's because I'm kind of gonna shit on a lot of people, but I'm gonna try to do it in a way that's like respectful and like, there's a bug in my face. I just want to like tell my truth. This is my official trigger warning. I will be talking about racism, generational trauma. There might be a mention of hate crime. And then on top of that, I just want to acknowledge my privilege before I get started with anything, because even though I am Asian American and I'm Southeast Asian, so I'm not East Asian, there is definitely an element of colorism within American society. So even though I'm not like the model minority, I'm still Asian, and I'm not Black, and I'm not Indigenous or Hispanic. So there is like a layer of privilege that I get from being Asian, and there's also a layer of privilege in me growing up in a white household that I feel like a lot of non-adoptees and like more culturally Asian people don't have that privilege. Like, there's both pros and cons to that. I'll dive into that, but I just want to say that, yeah, I just want to be like, this is not meant to be a sob story. I just wanted to talk about it. And audio sync. Cool. So the first chapter, let me tell you my backstory, let me tell you my lore. So for context, I am an Asian adoptee, which means that I was adopted from Southeast Asia. I was adopted from Cambodia, which if you don't know, Cambodia is the country that's like right next to Vietnam. I'm doing a really bad job explaining it. Here's a map. That's where I'm from. I don't know I know nothing. It was a closed adoption. I literally know nothing. Sometimes people ask like, oh, do you know your family? And I'm like, nope, not a clue. I have no idea. I know nothing. I also have no medical history, so I try not to think about that too much. I don't really know exactly how it works, but I think my mom like initiated the adoption when I was a couple months old. But here's the thing, I was born in 2001. I was born in November 2001. I was born post 9/11, but like literally right after 9/11. A lot of foreign affairs within the US are just like really messy, as one would be. It makes a lot of sense considering the circumstances, but because of that, coming to the US got delayed by 2 years, literally 2 whole years. My mom did not have Amazon Prime. It took a while. Expedited shipping, what is that? I don't know how much of an impact that really had overall, because that was before my long-term memory set in, so to be honest, I don't think it made that much of a difference for me personally. My mom, different story. For more context, I went to public school my whole life. I went to public school in my hometown, and I think it's important to mention that I live in a predominantly white town. Like, when I say predominantly, I'm talking like somewhere between 92 to 98% white. I don't know what the current stats are. It's always fluctuating, but it's like always somewhere within that range. We love overhead lighting. Editing me, good luck. I was also adopted by a single white mother, which means that I did grow up without a father. To be honest, not really that bothered by that. Men irk me, so I think I dodged a bullet there. That's a joke. That's a joke. But yeah, I grew up single parent. She was a teacher, so we were not ballin', we were not that bougie, but that was fine. I didn't have any problems with that as a kid. Very humble upbringings, if you will. Because of all of that, I did grow up not really knowing my culture. I never learned my, you know, what I guess would have been my first language. My first language and only language that I know is English. That's the only one that I'm fluent in. I don't really know anyone else that's Cambodian. I know a couple people, but I didn't grow up with them. Actually, that's not true. I grew up with one other person that was Cambodian, but we weren't really friends. We just had some of the same classes. Like, we weren't in the same friend group. And low-key, sometimes people would ask if we were related because we looked alike, which fair. We didn't look not alike, but like we weren't identical the way that people said we were. It's just that we were the only two Southeast Asians other than a couple Filipino kids. I don't know, people would always be like, oh, you two have to be cousins, and I'd be like, no, I don't even think I know his last name. I keep tucking my hair behind my ears and I feel like it makes me look like a nerd. There's also not a lot of Cambodian food or like my culture. I live in Western Mass. It's very, it's very white, very straight, very leans conservative. People in my town will be like, oh, this is a liberal town, and I'm like, it's really not. If I were to label it anything, I'd say it's like moderately Democrat, but like emphasis on the moderate. It's just very white. I don't know how else to describe it other than it being very white, which I don't necessarily mean that in a derogatory way. It's just when you're not white, it can create some complications. So continuing on, I feel like as a kid, I didn't experience like any aggressive racism. It was a lot of just like ignorant, clueless, just like stupid, like childish. Like, I guess that's the word, childish racism. It's like people walking up to me and being like, you're Buddhist, right? Because you're Asian. And they would do this and go, like in my face at recess. And I'm like, what is going on? Not every Asian person's a monk. In fact, I'd say most Asian people are not monks. Yeah, and like again with the other thing I said, there was another Cambodian kid in my grade. There was literally only one, and everyone would always insist that we were related or cousins, and we'd always have to be like, we're not. They would start debates with us, they would argue with us, and it's like, I don't know what to tell you because we're just not. This is the only one that like kind of gets me. It wasn't the friend's fault, it was her mother. I had a friend in elementary school, and I later was friends with her in high school. I didn't remember this until she mentioned it to me in high school and like apologized for it, which is honestly really sweet and mature of her to do. I would never have asked her to do that. I repressed this memory, so it's not something that bothered me until I thought about it more. As a kid, I had a friend whose mother, we'll call her very conservative because I don't really know her political alignment. She just really believed that people, like kids, should interact with their own race and ethnicity and cultural identity, which to an extent, like, I get it because I feel like to have a sense of community is important, so I get that aspect. However, she was basically saying that she thinks that kids should be segregated, but without saying that. And so she told this girl that she didn't want her to be friends with me because I'm Asian. And I do remember after she mentioned this to me, I was like, I do remember you saying that to me on the playground. And it was very much like her reluctantly saying it to me, like she didn't want to say it, but it was one of those things where like a parent makes you say the thing and you don't want to get in trouble, so you say the thing. But like looking back on it, I'm like, that's how racism starts. It starts because you're taught it. You're not born racist, you're taught that. It's an ideology that you're taught. I do a really bad job explaining in the video, but what I'm trying to say is I get that like within racial minorities, though this woman was a white woman, so keep that in mind, I do get the importance of like having a sense of community with other people that come from the same culture as you and the same ethnic background. But like, do you mind? But when it becomes problematic is when you're strictly saying that like your kids should only interact with other people of the same race, especially when that's like not a possibility, because there really weren't that many Asian kids growing up, especially not many like South and Southeast Asian kids. That'd be like literally me and like 2 other kids, because sometimes I'm like, oh, my town wasn't that bad. I'll hear about other people's experiences and I'll be like, my town wasn't that bad, and then I remember things like this and I'm like, okay, we weren't great either. That's what I'm trying to say. However, because I had a white mom, I didn't really experience a lot of what most Asian kids I feel like say. You know, I didn't experience the packed lunch and people being like, oh, your food's disgusting. I experienced that in college, but not in elementary school. So at least when I was experienced in college, it's something where I could be like, that's a them problem, because I was old enough to understand that it quite literally is a them problem. So like, I guess I'm privileged in that aspect where I didn't like face any discrimination for my food because I just didn't have it. The only other thing I've written down as like a significant thing to mention is it's like so problematic that I don't even really know how to react. It's like just like one of those things where I'm like, That was sad. Because I'm Southeast Asian, I get a lot more tan than someone who's maybe Chinese, Mongolian, Korean, Japanese, whatever. I'm quite literally physically closer to the equator, so we're gonna evolve to have more tan skin, more melanin. As a child, I spent my summers outside literally every day, rain or shine. I would get very tan. That tan would stay for a long time, like well into October. Distinctly remember, this was like 6th grade too. Like this would have been my first year of middle school had my schools been set up correctly. So I came back with my annual tan from being outside all summer, and I come back in the fall and this girl looks at me, like her jaw literally drops and says, "Jenna, I didn't know you were black." And I just look at her and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "You're like really dark." And I'm like, I mean, I guess, like, I am very tan, but I'm not black. I'm pretty sure I'm not black. I was very confused. I'm like, what is going on? And then only as an adult, like, looking back on it, I'm like, oh, it's because I got really tan, and people didn't realize that, like, non-black people can also have deeper complexions. Not that my complexion is deep, but, like, remember, in comparison to white people, deeper complexion. That, I think, confused them. But I'm not black, to my knowledge. I'm pretty sure that I'm 100% Asian. I have no idea. I have to do a DNA test, but I'm really scared to send out my DNA to some corporation that I'm a paranoid person, so I don't know about that. Moving on to middle school, we're gonna try to breeze through this one as fast as possible because I have a lot to say about high school and I've been talking for a long time. I've been talking for literally 30 minutes. Okay, I can already tell the lighting in this is not it. I'm gonna not have fun editing this. The lighting in this video when I filmed it could not be worse. Tell me why this lighting looks so much better. It's because of this plant light, but still. It's so annoying. If it's really yellow, there's nothing I can do about it. I feel like middle school can be summarized with, if elementary school is confusing, middle school Jena was, I don't know how to summarize this in one word, but middle school Jena, I think just really desperately, you know, like most middle schoolers wanted to fit in, but it was on a deeper level because I just so desperately wanted to be white. And I know that that sounds crazy. And what I mean by that is at the time I had an all white friend group minus one other Asian girl. And we didn't even get to be like close friends until 8th grade. So 7th grade, again, remember, my schools are set up stupid. So my middle school is 7th and 8th grade, like the 2 worst years in middle school. That was a bad school. It was not the teacher's fault. It was not like anything on the faculty. It was just the really old buildings. That didn't help. Like they're just not, everyone's a mess. But yeah, middle school sucked for me. I hated middle school. The span of 7th grade to 9th grade, the worst years of my life. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't an element of race that made it that way. As I was saying with like wanting to be white, all of my friends were white and I would often feel like my friends would get more recognition from teachers and from peers than me. And like to a degree, there was a personality difference. I won't lie. That was obviously part of it. But I feel like there was also a lot of just implicit bias. This was the first time I'd witnessed implicit bias. And so even though I didn't quite understand it, I think I subconsciously started to understand like the effects of it, if that makes sense. This is the point of the video where I start putting up to like giant definitions so we're all on the same page. So pause if you need to read it. Keep in mind, this is the era of the British YouTubers. This is 2014 to 2016. The Zoella era, the Dan and Phil, Dodie Clark, who else is popular? Like all of those people, everyone was white. And the pop stars at the time were white, you know. This was also the era of Instagram makeup and like really heavy makeup. And a lot of it just didn't suit Asian features, and I didn't realize that at the time because there were no Asian people to tell me that since we have different facial structures, we should be using different makeup techniques. There was no one to tell me that, and so I was growing up. This is probably when I was most self-conscious about how I look because I wanted so desperately to be like everybody else. I wanted to shop from the same brands. I wanted to wear the same makeup. I wanted to like look like them. But the contour techniques didn't work on me because I have a different facial structure. Like, no kidding that your nose contour sucks, Jena. It's because you don't have a fucking nose bridge. It's like all these things where I just want to go back and tell younger Jena, you need to stop stressing because it's not you, it's the culture. It is literally not your fault. You are not ugly. It's just not meant for you, and that's fine. There wasn't really any good Asian representation at the time. I like almost I didn't pick it, but I almost started a fight in a Zoom chat one time because I made a project about Asian representation in film for a class, and I included 2016 Suicide Squad, the character Katana, which was the most one-dimensional character ever. She was very much just like a stereotype. And then someone in the comment was like, I'm so glad that you included her. She's such a great representation for Asian women in the DC universe. And I'm like, she's really not, but I didn't want to start a fight because I was already so tired that I just didn't say anything. Honestly, that's sums up a lot of when people say like super ignorant things, because you have to choose your battles. So a lot of times I don't say anything because I'm like, is this really that productive? Is this really gonna have an impact? Probably not, so I'm not gonna say it, even when sometimes I should. And again, in middle school and high school, for the most part, all the teachers were white, and I feel like there is some impact, some influence from that. I just wanted so badly to be white, and I just obviously wasn't, and make me a lot of the time feel very spooky. And so because of that, I'd be very isolated in my feelings because I didn't really have anyone else to talk to. Who was I gonna tell? I didn't even have the words to express how I felt. I just felt significantly uglier and like less successful and like less appealing than all of my friends, and I couldn't figure out why. But I think and again, like, I didn't know this at the time. This is a lot of it is me looking back on it and sort of psychoanalyzing myself. So I wouldn't say anything malicious necessarily. No, that's not true. People were very anti-Semitic in my high school. That is a different story and not really one for me to tell, but I will just throw that out there. People were terrible. People were really homophobic in middle school. They were really anti-Semitic. They were really racist. Typically not to Asian people though. I think it's because we just didn't have that many Asian kids. It just wasn't relevant because there was no one who was Asian, so there was no Asian kid to pick on, is what I'm saying. Like, there was me, but a lot of the time I was a nerd, a pretentious, obnoxious nerd. Like, I'm not like other girls kind of nerd. There were easier things to go after than me just being Asian. So the only other thing that I want to mention in middle school is in 8th grade, I went on a field trip to Washington, D.C. This is such a footnote in everybody else's narrative, but I feel like this was such a turning point for me, and that is, it was in the Holocaust Museum, which, by the way, I did almost get in a lot of trouble because I had an iced tea in my bag. You're not supposed to have not clear liquids in your bag when you go through the metal detectors, so they did almost have to call someone on me, but that's okay. Anyway, we all were split up into little groups. The whole grade went on this trip, so obviously you can't go as one giant group. Someone in my small group had to go to the bathroom, so we all went downstairs to, go to the bathroom. And outside of the bathrooms, of course, I mean, it is a Holocaust museum, so I'm not gonna be like, we should be on the billboard, because that would be inappropriate. I feel like it's telling that the only place that you could locate this was outside of the bathrooms. Okay, I just want to make a disclaimer. So like, I don't mean any of this towards the museum itself. This is not meant to be like an insult towards the Holocaust Museum at all. I respect this museum so much. It was an incredible experience to see this. And I feel like anyone who hasn't been to this museum and has the opportunity to go, I would really highly recommend it. Basically, I was upset in this video because I feel like outside of Vietnam, Southeast Asian history is often overlooked and erased from American history, despite how much impact the CIA and like the US government and honestly just Western colonization as a whole had on Cambodia, really the rest of Southeast Asia. I mean, obviously I can't prove this because I can't go back and rewrite history, but I feel like Cambodia would not be where it is today if it hadn't been for the US. We would have a much different history and probably a lot less generational trauma, to be honest, or like different generational trauma, but that's a different discussion. It can be a little dehumanizing seeing how little care and recognition and honestly respect we receive from like the Western world overall. I feel like the only time people mention Cambodia, it's to be like the butt of a joke. There's literally even a whole nanny episode about how Fran Vine and her best friend Val adopt a Cambodian orphan, and then she like comes back and tries to like date Brighton, the kid she's nannying, so that she can be a US citizen or something like that. I forget, but it's like, it did not age well, and I feel like that's how it is with just about every time it's mentioned in a TV show like in America. And sometimes I feel like Cambodia and nation neighbors will never escape the title of third world country, and thus its immigrants are branded as perpetual foreigners and continued to be erased from like Western narratives and culture. Like, I feel like when people think of Cambodia, people just think of fields and landmines and elephants and just like literally nothing, but like we have cities, we have our own version of The Voice, but I don't know, I feel like people really only think of it as like a cheap tourist attraction or as a nationwide sweatshop, and there's no in between. It would just be nice if we got some recognition, and it would be huge if we got some recognition in DC, since that's like, well, the capital, but we just haven't gotten there, and that's, I mean, it's not okay, but like, it is what it is. So yeah, I just want to say that. Literally did not mean to come at the Holocaust Museum at all. That was not my intention. It just kind of came off that way because I was getting tired at this point in the video, so I did a bad job explaining, but yeah. So obviously, Holocaust, that was genocide. So they had on display another genocide, and it was the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot. And if you don't already know, Pol Pot was It was like ultra communism. He committed a lot of, he killed a lot of people. I think it was 2 million, which in relation to the population of Cambodia, that's like 1/4 of the population. And there was a stand outside of the bathroom that had TVs broadcasting footage, and it was sort of like a documentary situation going on. There was like a little radio that was giving commentary, and then there was just all this footage of like the war-torn Cambodia, and it was just really eye-opening for me to see people that looked like me, but also heartbreaking because it was people that looked like me and children that looked like me, but they were suffering. They were starving. 9-year-olds carrying rifles on their backs. It was a lot, and like I didn't know how to feel about it other than just like to have the first representation of your culture and your people in a long time be war footage. It's a lot. I kind of put that on the back burner because my friends, to be honest, did not care. And why would they? Because I never mentioned it until probably when I looked back on it my sophomore or junior year in high school. But I feel like that was a turning point for me to like no longer turn my back on what I left behind, even though it wasn't my choice to leave it behind. High school, this is where we dive into Jena's traumatic backstory. It really wasn't that bad. If I was to describe any of this as traumatizing, it would be this era. So for a reference, when I entered high school as a freshman, it was 2016. You know what that means? 2016 presidential election. You know what that means? We don't have to talk about it. So I had a best friend that was also an adoptee from Asia, so at least I wasn't alone anymore. And honestly, this friendship with this girl meant the world to me because I've never had something like that before. I feel like had I not had that friendship, I would have been in a much worse place than I am now. So if you're watching this video for some reason, shout out to you. I appreciate you. I think it took until high school for me to finally understand that I'm Asian and what that meant, because that sounds really stupid, but when you grow up very much whitewashed and out of no malicious intent, but when you grow up super whitewashed, it's difficult to really identify as Asian, even though there's really no other way to identify because I'm clearly not white. Even though I'm very American, there's no actual white blood in me, even though the culture that raised me was white and derived from Europe. There's no European actually in me. You have sort of a split personality, and this is where like slurs come in, where people say things like the banana slur. So like yellow on the outside, white on the inside, though I'm not even technically like what people call a yellow Asian, which if you say that, stop that, don't say that. That's messed up. Don't call people yellow. That's more of an East Asian thing, and I guess technically I lean more towards brown on the scale of colorism, but I'm not like South Asian. Those are like truly deep complexions. I'm like, I guess I began to finally sit down and teach myself, as much as I could anyways, about my country's history and its culture and everything that I kind of missed out on. And it was very difficult because obviously when you're not learning about it in class, it's up to you to find reliable resources, and resources that are in English, which is surprisingly difficult, and things that are up to date, like an article that wasn't written in 2008 because the recent ones are not in English, which obviously they don't need to be accommodating for English, but for me personally, it's very difficult because I only speak English and I can only read English, so it's not necessarily helpful for me. The very few Cambodian YouTubers I could find in high school were very, very helpful, and so this is where I shout out YouTuber Jenny Day. Jenny Day, you got me through high school because you were the only beauty content creator that Southeast Asian, and specifically Cambodian, that also spoke English in the majority of your videos. Like, obviously I would never force someone whose first language isn't English to speak English. I would never force someone to do that. It's just xenophobic, isn't it? Or like even the people that were people of color, they were black, so even though I love and respect them and I see a lot of value in their perspective, and I would never not sit down and listen to them, it's just not quite the same. And sometimes I want to be very careful on how deep I step into a space that isn't mine. I mean, I'm not saying that in like a gross segregated way. I just mean like the black community is a black community, and I don't want to overstep my proximity to like people of color, because even though I am a person of color, I'm not black. Like, those are not the same thing. There's like a little Venn diagram, you know? How did I even get here? I don't know. Oh, this is just like a stupid nitpick, but like people in my high school, I like distinctly remember multiple people doing this too. People would say, or they'd claim that my high school, they would claim that it was very diverse because people were from all over. But really what that meant, what they were really saying is my high school was diverse in the way that people's families were from all over Europe. A lot of European representation. I feel like people knew not to be, for the most part, outwardly racist. It was a lot of the like white moderate type BS. Microaggressions were the way to go. If you wanted to be subtly racist, microaggressions are the way to go, because no one will check you, because no one will pick up on it. Because unless you're a person of color, it's not your problem, therefore you're not gonna look for it. That's how white privilege works. If people could just say things, and unless you're like really listening, no one would really react, and if people did react, no one would actually say anything, because what are you gonna say? Like, it was very much a, we need a safe face because we don't want to be the problem, or we don't want to start a problem, bystander mentality. So I guess I sort of already mentioned this before, but basically the curriculum didn't mention Asian people like at all, and there were no electives about us. Like, as far as representation goes, we just didn't matter. And you could probably say the same about Latino people and Hispanic people and Black people to a degree if you exclude W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King, and the Civil Rights Movement, the whitewashed version of the Civil Rights Movement. That's about it. That was the extent of our like diverse curriculum. Everything else is very Eurocentric, which I guess is to be expected out of PWI. It still sucks, and it can still be fixed. I think another turning point in like me realizing just how messed up some of the stuff about my hometown is when, I don't want to say too much about this because it's not my story to tell, and it didn't impact my specific community, like Asian people. It didn't really affect us the same way, but I will say there was my school against I think it was a Black student. I do not know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that they were Black. But it was about the use of saying the N-word. And so it did involve an 18-year-old literally breaking the jaw of a freshman, and the like immediate reaction to when that part of the story came out to the general public was my school being like, we need to save face, like we need to show people that we're not racist. And it's like, a lot of people in the school are racist, and even if they're not maliciously racist, they're like so ignorant to the point where you can still say that they're racist. Like, they think a lot of like racist things, even if they don't mean it to like actually be hurtful or discriminatory. It still is. That doesn't make it not discriminatory. So like, say things like all Chinese people eat dogs. That's still racist, whether you meant it like that or not. And so my school sort of created these meetings. This was in my junior year, and called Diversity Club. It was performative at best. Yeah, so it was just a group of white students and a couple white teachers that kind of wanted to better themselves, or they were under the guise of bettering themselves, but really they just wanted to make the school look not racist and paint us in a better light, even though, to be honest, this was the one time where I think the school was accurately portrayed. I would say that. I'm not sure I would die on that hill, but I would say that. I went to these meetings not necessarily because I thought there would actually be any action taken. I just wanted to make sure that I was still in the loop to see what was going on and to maybe stop any misinformation being spread, because a lot of the time I would just get talked over by white students, like older white students, because I was a junior. A lot of seniors would just like talk over me. As a seniority thing, I get it, but at the same time I'm like, this is about issues regarding race, therefore I feel like my opinion as a person of color and my perspective as a person of color is more important than yours as a white person. But whatever. It was just overall not effective. And I even tried restarting it senior year, where I sort of wanted to take charge and invite other people of color to take charge with me, and no one responded to my emails. One teacher responded and was like, you can absolutely host this in my classroom. But none of the other teachers responded, and I was like, if I can't even get teachers on board with this, I don't know how I'm gonna get students on board, so I just dropped it. Oh man, my senior year, that is a whole subchapter, whole subcategory within itself. My senior year was a mess. A lot of my junior year can be summed up with me not picking fights that I should have picked, because people would say things that were just not okay. They were super problematic, super racist, but I wouldn't say anything because I was worried that people would look at me and be like, she's the girl that starts fights. I was class secretary at the time, and I was determined to be class secretary my senior year. I was determined to have that, and I was so worried and scared of losing that over like a stupid controversy. I was scared of being canceled, basically, that I wouldn't say anything, and I held my tongue on so many occasions that I normally wouldn't, but I did it because I was scared, because I feel like people held me to a higher standard than they did popular white girls, because it's like, for them, if they say something problematic, it's old news pretty fast. But if like I did it, I would be like branded as the girl that starts drama or that picks fights or whatever, and I didn't want that because I really wanted to be class secretary, and so I didn't, and then I lost it anyways over a stupid rumor. It's fine, because I lost half my senior year anyways due to COVID, so it is what it is. Yeah, after I lost that and and a lot of my close friends were from the class of 2019, so they graduated a year before me. I was like, I don't have anything to lose. Like, I don't really have that many friends left in this class. I don't have any like titles to lose, so what's the point? And so I would talk about the discussions that no one talked about. I would talk about colonialism in class. I would talk about how much that affects modern day and how European countries like Belgium and France, they're beautiful countries, but a lot of that beauty was paid off by blood money because they exploited and abused and murdered and tortured black people and people of color. That's kind of how they got there today, and not saying that is not being honest about the actual authentic history of those countries and how France has a lot of stolen art from Africa. People did not like that because a lot of the class was very French, and they were very, even though they're like 10% French, they were very like, I'm France and this is offensive to my ancestors. This is another just like side note, like a little thing that irked me. People were very discriminatory against Hispanic and Latino people, especially if you were had more melanin. Of course, the more melanin, the more yikes your situation got, because people did not like you because a lot of white supremacists went to my high school. They didn't quite know they were white supremacists yet, but a few of them did essentially admit to being white supremacists after they graduated, so woo. So a lot of people were anti-black and brown people, yet when they'd go to prom, they would get really aggressive spray tans. And listen, there is nothing wrong with a good spray tan. I am not coming for you and your spray tans. I love having tan skin, okay? It's great. It's a big flex in the summer. However, it's a little hypocritical when you hate people for their darker skin and then you get a spray tan the same shade of the people that you discriminate against. It's a little hypocritical. And as someone who had the same shade, not necessarily right now, I haven't been outside enough, but when I'm a little bit more tan, I had the same complexion as their spray tans, but they would talk smack about like Asians and like South Asians and Southeast Asians. So it's just like kind of like, give me my skin tone back. Like, I'm revoking your right to be the same foundation shade as me. Thank you. I will say there were a couple Chinese students that went to my school and they did definitely get tokenized for being cool Asians, because if you're from China, Korea, or Japan, people thought of you as more cool versus me, who was from, I'm sorry, I'm petting my dog, not one of those easy nameable countries, because no one could remember where I was from. A lot of the time, I think people didn't even associate me with being Asian, which is a whole other discussion about colorism. I did have one racist teacher. Let's get this one over with fast because I'm scared. I don't think she knew she was racist, but I, as a person of color, know that she was a little bit racist. So she would just say things that I'm like, you can't, that's not really okay for you to say. Senior year, actually, that was the year that my high school was getting accredited, so I'm not saying there's a correlation, but there's probably a correlation. We had 2 foreign exchange students my senior year, one from Germany, so, you know, white boy, and then a boy from Thailand. So to be honest, here's the thing, like, I'm not saying this in like a pick-me girl way, but I feel like they were really tokenized, which was like kind of irritating, because people would be like, oh, you're so cool because you're Asian, you're good at math, you know, blah blah blah, but like then they'd look at me and think that I was less smart. Like, for example, sometimes it'd be me and like another Asian girl who was Chinese, and I don't know why I said it like that, who was Chinese, and like, I'm not saying that I'm smarter than her, because that's not true. It's just sometimes I would quite literally have the correct answers because I would be in that, I'd already taken that class, and so, you know, there'd be like 2 sections of the same class, or like I'd have that section, like my section would have been first in the day and then the second section. And so sometimes there were a couple times when like someone in the second section would ask like my friend who was Chinese for the answer, but I'd be like, I have the answer, I just came from that class, I have the correct answer, but they would still listen to her over me. And it's hard to say, like, it happened enough times where I feel like it's hard to say that it wasn't a little bit of implicit bias towards someone with lighter skin and is also associated with being the model minority. Hi baby, I know, I'm so, oh, don't do that. I know, I'm so sorry, I'm not gonna eat her. Someone did make a joke about that in front of me. I won't say that they made it at me, but I know that they said it because they knew I would hear and get mad about it. What else? Oh yeah, I didn't finish that. I'm so sorry. So I did have a kind of racist teacher. They would just kind of sometimes say things where I'm like, don't say that. Like, oh, why did you change your name? You should have kept your Asian name, as if I had any say in the matter. I was 2 years old. I didn't sign my own little legal document and be like, I approve of changing my name because I was a baby. What was I gonna do? You know, it's just, interesting how in the honors section of this class it was split into two sections, honors and non-honors. It's just interesting how me being the only not white kid in the honors section, it was something, it wasn't like math where like there were correct answers, it was something a little bit more up for interpretation. It's just interesting how a lot of my stuff would be graded a lot lower than the white kids in the group, but I got a C so many times in that class, like on assignments, that I just honestly don't think I deserved a C for. Like, I wouldn't say like A+ quality, but I don't think it was worthy of a C+ either. Like, I feel like a B+, A-, somewhere in that range. Yeah, it like halfway through the year I figured out like, oh, no matter what I do, I'm gonna get the same grade. So I quite literally would stop trying, which kind of sucked because I was really looking forward to that class. But I just stopped trying because I was like, I'm gonna get the same grade either way, so why put in all this effort when it's not gonna matter? Yeah, and they'd also just like make fun of the foreign exchange student for not being able to pronounce certain things. Like, I think they like made fun of them because they couldn't pronounce, it was either TH or CH. I forget which one. They were like nice, I think it was CH. They were like no, it was TH. They're like, nice TH. Well, that sound quite literally does not exist in Thai. When you don't grow up making that sound out of your mouth, you're not gonna be able to pronounce it as well as someone who grew up being able to make that sound. Like, for example, try speaking a Southeast Asian language. I bet you can't do it. I bet you can't even pronounce a one consonant, never mind all the consonants, you know? And then the year turned to 2020. If you know anything about Asian people in 2020, I think you know where this is going. Coronavirus has entered the chat. Remember, this is before the phrase COVID-19 became normalized and the go-to way to refer to it. It was back then, it was the coronavirus, or as people in my high school would say, because everyone on Fox News would say that, the China virus. Woo! Love that. That's true. That was disgusting. I hated that so much. It would make me so mad, but I never knew what to say because what can you say? Like, they would just be like, yeah, well, it originated from China. What am I supposed to say? Like, that was the narrative. So I didn't really have much of a defense other than, well, you can't really associate us Asian people with the virus. That's kind of xenophobic of you. And it was very much like dog eating jokes turned into bat eating jokes. Like, people would caption their prom photos, like their quarantine prom photos, with like, oh, I was supposed to wear this at prom today, but somebody decided to eat bat soup. Like, it's like a microaggression, but it's still offensive. Whenever I'd complain about this, like the few times I would complain about this to an adult, half the time they would say, well, it's kind of justified because people are scared, you know, people don't know what they're saying it because they're scared. And like, you can be scared all you want, but that's not an excuse to be racist, to be xenophobic, to be super ignorant. Like, you can be scared and not be a kind of terrible person, you know? Like, I feel like it shouldn't be that difficult. But if I complained, people would call me too sensitive and a sheep. So, or libtard. I was called a libtard quite a few times. And like, I'm not a liberal, but why though? Like, does it help you sleep at night to call me that? Probably not. So like, it got to be so bad, like I can put up some old tweets of just me expressing my frustration because no one reads my Twitter, so it felt like a pretty safe place to do it. It got so bad in March, I was relieved to be sent home and to lose the end of my senior year. That's how bad it was, because I was getting so fed up with listening to people say things and it just go unchecked, because the teachers are already stressed enough about how they're going to do their jobs. They don't have the time and honestly the energy to regulate what's coming out of students' mouths. While it's kind of their responsibility, it's also kind of not, because at this point it's senior year in high school. A third of these people are adults, so they should know better. Okay, and we have entered our final era, college. I've already kind of mentioned a lot of the things I was gonna say, but I'll just skim through it. The things that I feel like I should mention is, so in college, I think this is something that is probably gonna stick with me whether I like it or not for the rest of my life, and that is, it was summer 2020, or the summer before my freshman year in college. I, along with a bunch of other students and young people in my town, put together a vigil to honor victims of police brutality. I sort of took, I guess we called it like a stage manager. Everyone was like theater people, so we sort of referred to it as I was a stage manager. And so I was at the dress rehearsal for this because we wanted to make sure that like the mic worked and that everything like logistical was figured out. So I was there and I'd stayed a bit later than most of the other people. And keep in mind, I did have like a Black Lives Matter thing written on the back of my car, so you know the thing that people say where they're like, don't make your car recognizable? To be fair, I did make myself an easy target, because when you have something in handwritten on the back of your car in very huge white letters, that does make you kind of an easy target when people aren't exactly pro-BLM, which they believe that the majority of my town is pro-BLM, but I really don't know. A lot of people call BLM protesters Antifa, which is simply not correct. A bunch of white boys from my high school, most of them had been, I think almost all of them are graduates, whether from 2019 or 2020, but they had surrounded my car I was able to leave the parking lot, but like me and a group of my friends who are black, they're mixed. None of us had eaten that day, so we were all like, let's get McDonald's and let's get it right now. Let's get out of this parking lot because this is a little concerning. Like, I was a little scared. So we just booked it out of there, went to McDonald's. I had been waiting for my food because it's one of those things where like they have to make the food, so you have to pull up to the front and wait for someone to bring it out to you, which was very nice of them to do. I was in my car waiting, and not long, like it was definitely no more than a minute after I'd been waiting there, like a gray SUV, guys from my high school, a lot of the same guys that were just surrounding my car, pulled up next to me. So I don't think they even ordered anything because they just immediately drove off after this, but like spent a good 20 seconds just like screaming out their window, "White Lives Matter," yeah, Trump 2024, no, Trump 2020, yeah, Trump 2020, sorry. So yeah, it was just really bad. And only after I had talked to like the other people that organized this vigil, they were like, "Jenna, you do realize that if they showed up that close that soon after you arrived there, that means that they followed you there." And then I was like, ooh, that's not good. That is not the only time I was followed that summer. I was followed many a time by people that would just like tailgate me. It is what it is. But yeah, it happened quite a few times. I had been surrounded by a Trumpy motorcycle gang. I was a little bit late to work that day, and I had to explain that I was surrounded by a motorcycle gang, and I quite literally couldn't move forward or back because if I did, I would hit someone. That's the closest I ever got to like experience a hate crime, but I would not call any of those things a hate crime. They were just bad. But I wouldn't say they were hate crime level bad. And for college, I do attend, or I'm transferring, but I did attend college in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So it's known to be a super progressive and liberal city. It's a very white city though, so it's a very white feminism kind of city. And the school I went to, while being very liberal, it was still a PWI, so it's, again, everything is filtered through like a white gaze, if you will. Intersectionality was not something that I feel like talked about enough, and a lot of the time we discussed like race in class, there were two reactions. Sometimes people that would just say things that are really ignorant, but they'd say it like with full confidence, with their whole chest, and it was just not really the right thing to say. And then the other reaction was people that would be very hesitant and say things like, oh well, like as a white person I feel like it's not in my place to talk about, but like they wouldn't talk at all. So when doing that, you're just becoming a bystander and you're part of the problem, because it's very much like white silence is violence. So that's not very helpful either. Now, as I kind of said before, sometimes I bring Asian snacks to class with me just because I like them and I had access to them. I've never been this close to an H Mart in my life, so sometimes I go to H Mart, get snacks, bring them to class with me. People would be like, can I try it? And then they would try it and be like, ew, it's weird. And I'd be like, well, it is what it is. Like, sorry you don't like it. It's like at that point, like I'm not gonna pick a fight with someone because at this point they look childish. There's really not much more for me to do. What they say and their actions speak for themselves. There were times when I had professors that would, during icebreakers in the beginning of the course, they would go around and say what everyone wanted to do. I would say I want to be a cinematographer. I know it's shocking with how bad this lighting is, but I do want to be a cinematographer. And sometimes, like, there were a couple times when I had professors that would literally be like, oh, I don't know, I don't really picture you as a cinematographer, like, or oh, I don't know if you can handle being a DP. But then they'd be super excited when a white girl would be like, I want to be a director. And it's like, how come only one of us you think will be successful? Like, I know that it's a white industry, but it doesn't really make me feel better if you'd already be on me before you've even seen my work. And then, like, people would ask me a lot of questions, but, like, a lot of them I feel like were just things that you could just Google. Like, sometimes I would just be super exhausted and people would still ask me all of these questions. Like, it would be like a night class and be very clearly exhausted, or even after a night class, and I would just be super tired because I just went through a full day of classes, and people would ask me questions after questions, which, like, I normally love, offering any wisdom and knowledge that I have on a given subject, especially when it's about Asian issues. But I'm not an encyclopedia. If I'm not feeling it in the moment, it's not my job to educate other people. Google is free. So I think that's most of what I wanted to say. I also wanted to mention, I just want to I include this. When people would say things in high school that were like offensive, these are the kinds of things that people would say. Like, again, these aren't the worst things that you could say, but they're not great either. Here's some of the worst things that people said. Again, they're not the worst things that could be said. I would never wish it upon anyone else. I did have a couple people genuinely ask if I was a legal citizen. Yes, I'm a legal citizen. I've been coming home after like 8 months in Cambridge. Even though Cambridge had its flaws, definitely a different environment, definitely still a lot less toxic. And I come home and it's like, woo, Trump flags. Blue Lives Matter flags, love thy neighbor, but if they're gay, never mind. You know, that's very much the vibe I get every time I come home, and it's like a shock to the system. I don't want to be too mean to the people that live here and to the nice people that live here and bash the whole town when it's not them. I want to say that it's only 1/3 of the town that's like really bad, but they're really loud, so it does make it feel sometimes like it's the whole town. This was a very long video, so if you're still at this point, thank you so much for listening and hearing me out. You did not have to do that, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do that. I'm gonna be editing this video for a long time, so if I missed something, I'm sorry. I've been filming for a long time. I'm gonna go. If you want to learn more about stories like mine, and I sound like an end of like a PBS show. But if you want to learn more about like Southeast Asian culture and Asian issues and things like that, I will put resources below. I will put any books that I've read, which to be fair is not a lot, so the list probably could be longer. I just don't want to recommend anything I haven't read in case it's actually not good. I'll put films below, any that I know, videos that are helpful. I forgot to mention, okay, I'm so sorry. The whole reason I did this video, oh my god, the whole reason I did this video is in honor of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This really fast because my camera battery is gonna die. So yeah, happy AAPI month. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up because that's the thing. I will see you in the next video. All right, bye guys. We did it, YouTube. We did it. We're done with the video. Also, feel free to leave any questions below. I have like 0 subscribers, so I will see your comments. So as long as it's respectful, I will try to respond as helpfully as I can. If I don't know quite the right answer, I'll try to refer you to someone who will. And okay, that's all. I need to go walk my dog. All right, bye guys.